So, Kit is the runner that you wanted to do today, you wanted to talk about. So,
Yeah.
tell me a little bit about why, from a thematic perspective, you're really interested in Kit.
Uh, well, a lot of people realize at this point that a lot of my how do I say this? A lot of my inspirations for characters uh, come from people I know, or are pulled and sort of morphed from uh, real people, or real life. So I have a friend, Gabrielle, and she is a huge Doctor Who fan, uh, as am I. And so uh, she does a bit of cosplay and such, but uh, I decided that I wanted to make a card sort of after her, kind of looks like her, kind of like get into that headspace about what would she be like in this future space. But at the same time, I wanted to give a shout out to the fact that she's a huge Doctor Who fan. It was one of the earlier moments of our bonding and our friendship. Hence the Kit Peddler for the Riel. Um, Kit Pedler was British uh, a British scientist who was also a science fiction author, and he did a fair amount of work for Doctor Who. He was sort of their scientific advisor. He's the person who came up with the idea of the Cybermen.
Right.
So the idea of Riel, Kit Pedler, essentially trying to turn herself into a non-human or transhuman entity, like to get beyond the
The
yeah,
limitations.
beyond the limitations of the human flesh, essentially.
Right.
Was fascinating to me. I've always thought that the transhumanism movement to be incredibly interesting, driving forward concepts of what does it mean to be human, how we will interface with machines in the future, just endlessly fascinating.
Right.
And so I decided this would be a really great place to take a look at that, especially considering, androids are sentient beings that are not considered human.
Right. So, she's a human that, from the perspective of lay people in the Netrunner world, she would be a human that's trying to turn herself into something that other people don't consider a person. She's trying to, from their perspective, she's trying to dehuman herself. Right?
Yeah.
She's taking away the parts of her that, in their mind, make her better than a machine.
Um, it's, I would say that some part of humanity would absolutely agree with that statement. Others would disagree. It's sort of the question of their time. So you have, humanity, labor, and human first, who would absolutely agree that she's less human, less than human, that she is a seriously misguided individual.
Right.
Uh, so there is that side of it. But there are other people who are going to view the concept of adding on to themselves, replacing their human parts with things that are simply just more efficient, as the next logical step for mankind.
Right. And there's all sorts of neat themes, which we're not going to get into here, but people watching at home, if you've never read any literature or just read up on the whole idea of the transhumanism movement, I strongly recommend it. There's a lot of really interesting stuff there, not the least of which being the question of implications, again, coming back to the Netrunner world of if transhumanism becomes popular, then does it create a situation where rich people are literally superior to people who can't afford expensive upgrades? And there's all these other social themes about, like, are you you? What? How can you be sure? Ghost in the Shell type themes as well,
Yeah.
about who you are and where you've been if you're not occupying your original body anymore, and all these things. But yeah, if you've never done any transhuman media, I strongly recommend looking into it. There's a lot of really neat themes there for people to explore. So let's talk about the cards. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with events, icebreakers, programs? What do you want to do first?
Why don't we go ahead and start with, well, actually, why don't we go ahead and start with resources?
Okay. So as far as resources are concerned, what do you want to add in first?
The very first thing that I want to add in is Temple of the Liberated Mind.
Now, to all of you people at home, just a reminder that we are doing what is largely a thematic deck here. Damon is not claiming that this is a Tier 1 competitive deck.
I'm not even sure if it's a Tier 2 competitive deck. I haven't actually tested this deck out. It is kind of a shell of a deck that I was using during playtesting, and then I just made it more thematic than it already was.
Right. So looking at Temple of the Liberated Mind, we have a location, it's ritzy, it's 2 cost, and for a click you can place a single power counter on the temple. And you can remove a hosted power counter to gain a click, use this only on your turn and only once per turn. So it's a way of banking clicks.
Yeah. And the tie-in here is that Kit, if you take a look at a number of her cards, take a look at some of the cards that were released during Creation Control when she was introduced, has a very strong Indian, as in subcontinent, theme about her. The glowing gems on her body correspond to the chakras. And Temple of the Liberated Mind is the place within our Android lore where she went and studied a fair amount of what the spirituality that she embraces and that she uses as the root of her own quest to become more than human.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. So, see, that's something I didn't really think about too much, right?
Yeah.
So we're getting some reveals here. What do you want to talk about next?
Well, let's go ahead and move to Guru Devinder.
How many are we putting in? I think it's 1. Yeah,
Yep,
1.
just 1.
So Guru Devinder. So it's a 1 cost, unique connection. Prevent all net and meat damage. Whenever Guru Devinder prevents at least 1 net or meat damage, trash him unless you play 4. So it's kind of like a Plascrete for net damage as well, that you have to reinstall every time you use it if you can.
Essentially, yeah.
Interesting. So I imagine, tell me how where the tie-in is here. I imagine he's associated with the temple.
Yes, Devinder is one of the temple elders.
Interesting. I just like the interesting theme here, the art, right? Like he's in a temple that's all about transcendence and enlightenment, and then he's basically astrally projecting himself, but he's also still right there. You know what I'm saying? It's this idea of a lot of the things that are in the mythology or the dogma of certain religions of, being able to project your consciousness become possible in this universe using technology.
Yeah, that was actually a very large part of what was going through my mind when I created the temple. It's, let's say that sort of a pan-Asian, not exactly religious, more of like secular spiritualism,
Right.
but it borrows concepts pretty heavily from Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism. It's a transcendental philosophy about like how to escape from the human condition and being able to purify the soul, like the idea that life is suffering and that the idea of being able to transcend that, being able to, burn off your karma, all of these ideas sort of like gel around this idea of like, what happens if you remove suffering? What if you are plugged into the net, into a perfect 3D simulation that your mind recognizes as reality, and the body is taking care of all its physical needs? Like, in its own way, it becomes sort of a substitute for nirvana. And I just thought it was a really interesting concept. So I just sort of ran with it.
Yeah, I mean, and that also ties in with Kit because, if she fully becomes a transhuman and has that ability, as you said, to basically not know suffering, not know hunger, not know physical pain, obviously, as long as her parts, her body are taken care of, then she also kind of achieves that transcendence where she's purely engaged on a mental level. She's purely able to perceive without as you said, the human condition, right? The frailties of the human condition getting in the way of her interactions with the world.
That's it, exactly.
So what else do we have here?
Well, this is intended as a stealth deck. The idea here is if she is capable of truly projecting her consciousness, not just from a runner's perspective, but in the I actually exist within this space.
Right.
I thought of it, as you said, as like astral projection. Like she has a true avatar of herself within that realm of existence. And again, in this particular case, avatar would be used not in the here is some sort of iconic representation of the me in cyberspace, but the more spiritual version of it, as is used in Hindu, an actual projection of life force, a version of yourself.
Right.
So,
and that's kind of what's seen in the picture with Guru Devinder, is he's projecting his mental and spiritual self as he perceives himself to be as an entity.
Yes. So with that in mind, 3 Ghost Runners would be the next card.
One of my all-time favorite cards, but I'm a big lover of stealth.
As am I.
Yeah, and it's also got a very thematic quote for this deck. In the spaces between the data, do trapped souls from the past persist?
Which is a question we'll probably never really quite get answered, but it is a very good question to ask.
No Dixie Flatlines hanging around inside the net somewhere.
We'll see, maybe one day.
But yeah, it's 1 for 3 credits that can be used for stealth cards. It's tremendous. It's a really good card. I strongly recommend starting a stealth deck with 3 of them if you're building them at home. Pull them out later if you need to. So, as far as other money is concerned, we have a couple other money pieces as far as resources are concerned.
Absolutely. We have 3 daily casts.
So, there she is.
Smoke.
Yeah. So we've got, it looks like based on the list we've also got 2 Katie, or Cotty Jones, I should say.
Cotty Jones, that's correct.
Who is just really good. We're talking about old school Netrunner. She's old school Netrunner, right?
Yes, she is.
So we have Salset Slums, which is one of cards that I kind of had a question about with you. So we have this oftentimes, we see a blending of theme and also a blending of mechanics, right?
Mm-hmm.
You guys have a track record of adding things mechanically that we need added to the game or that are interesting adds, but also just blending them with a theme, right? So tell me a little bit about that process or could you speak a little bit about this card? Did you start with the mechanics and then add the theme, or did we start with a theme and add mechanics to it?
This one was actually sort of from the inside out rather than top down or bottom up.
Okay.
we sort of in the process of creating Mumbad, the actual place within the Android universe, we had listed a number of different interesting and compelling areas that we wanted to be able to explore, and then sort of like extrapolated out what those might end up looking like, 150, 300 years in the future. Excuse me. And this particular area was one of the ones that was on our list that we thought was particularly worthwhile and taking a closer look at. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So the whole idea of you have, Mumbad, this enormous, mega city that has, some amazingly wealthy people in it. And then you have something like Sunset Island, which is, just has essentially just become a set of slums. And what that would be like for the people who live there, what kind of resentments that would breed, what their day-to-day life would sort of like be like. And that sort of just led to the idea of, or I should say led to discussions regarding like, well, what happens when you have a group of people who have no real sense of being able to close the wage or education gaps between themselves and the upper class. And what tends to happen throughout history is a bit of violence, riots and destruction of their own areas, of the places that are owned by people who live outside of their own community, but who own significant portions of the areas that they actually live in. And so Sunset Slums sort of like kind of grew out of that. We knew that we needed to be able to handle some of the stuff that was getting recurred, and this sort of seemed to be a very natural fit for the slums. Yeah. Well, we certainly try to keep them, to keep the cards and the mechanics and the world themselves sort of linked. Sometimes we do better than others, but we're always making that attempt.
I'll give the example just very quickly. One of my all-time favorite cards that encapsulates theme and mechanics for me is the card Inject. I love that card so much.
Yeah.
It is so thematic to Anarchs. It's amazing. So the last resource we have is Turning Wheel.
Yes.
Which is such an interesting card. I'd like you to just briefly go into this card, because I don't know what the theme here is. Right? This is a card I think is tremendously cool from a mechanical perspective, but I wasn't able to kind of divine the theme myself.
Well, it's... How do I explain this? It is a concept in both sort of like in Buddhism and in Hinduism. From the Buddhist perspective, turning wheels are also known as prayer wheels.
Okay.
And it's a way to focus the mind, and I guess the easiest way to sort of think about it is a means of helping focus, get through and past the distractions that are just generally, around you.
So where do you want to go from here? That's our resources.
Go real quick, there's one other side of it, though. That is sort of the just general Buddhist side of it, but there's also a sort of a Jainism and Hinduism side to it, where it represents the Buddhist Dharma. So it's connected to the Noble Eightfold Path, the entire idea of the cycle of birth and rebirth. So the idea here is like, you're doing this task repeatedly, again and again, and each time you're getting further along that wheel until eventually, it pays off in the game, or In the case of the religion, you I guess the easiest way to say it is transcend. Understand that what I know about Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism comes from a fair amount of research, online, books, talking to people. I don't, for a moment, consider myself any sort of expert. So a lot of this is just me trying to remember the things that I had been told at the time when I was deep into the research regarding this cycle.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So that's our resource suite.
Yeah.
Where do we want to go from here?
Well, we're talking about kit. I think we need to go to hardware.
All right, let's talk about it. So we've got, looks like we got a feedback filter.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a pretty good one. It's getting better every day. And it's also got kit on it.
Yeah, for no other reason, just the fact that it has her third eye gem. This had to go into the deck. The fact that, generally speaking, you're going to be running as frequently as your credits are going to allow you to do so. Having to stop and slow down because you're running into damage is less than ideal. Hence the Guru, Devinder, and the feedback filter.
Right. We got 2 lockpicks. Lockpicks is a good card. This was the first on that long trail of that I've been on, and Seamus has been on from Scotland for a long time. Of maybe stealth is good now. We had like this line of cards. We're like, all right, maybe this time it's going to be that. Not that it's ever been bad. It's been strongly tier 1.5 for a long time. But lockpick's a really, really good card.
I'm definitely a fan.
Now, when I think of something like this, though, all of the stealth, from a mechanical perspective, all of the stealth hardwares are priced influence-wise like consoles. I assume that was very, very, very purposeful, just to not give any faction or make it too easy to import a full rig of stealth. Or export a full rig of stealth, I guess I should say.
Yeah, we were really concerned about the power level for stealth cards, knowing how they were going to end up working with a sort of like first wave of those cards. I think that we probably were a bit too conservative. I think that's part of the reason why stealth decks have just now really started getting to the point where people are going in and playing with them and doing pretty well. I think that some of these probably could have gone down just a little bit.
Don't worry, you can leave the fractal one at 3. But I don't know. We might see another stealth. I would love to see. Oh no, we are getting another stealth fractor, aren't we? There's a new one.
Possibly.
Well, no, there was one spoiled, I thought.
Okay, if there was one spoiled, then there's one spoiled.
Then there's one spoiled. Well, yeah, we've got Net Ready Eyes as well. One of my favorite cards that is also super duper thematic, not just in this deck, but just in a general sense. Like this is some cyberpunk right here. Like this is some chrome cyberpunk right here. Like get your eye cut out, get a new eye, but it's gonna do a bunch of damage to you.
Yeah, but it makes you better.
It does make you better. And like this is some, like I remember seeing this card when it was spoiled, and immediately I thought to myself, I'm like, that's some Shadowrun right there. That's what that is. Yeah. Like it's good and it's interesting. Again, it's just like since it's 0 cost, all these things, it's just like, oh yeah, it's not gonna cost you much. It's just gonna,
just
cost you just some damage. Yeah. Just, we're going to hit you in the face with some surgical tools. You'll be fine, probably.
Yeah. I mean, cracking open that orbital bone to be able to do the necessary insertion of, CPU and stuff. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. Yeah. Just take the antibiotics. You'll be fine.
Yeah. What I love is if you look into art, she's awake.
Yeah, no. I noticed that when I first cracked the pack. I'm like, she is watching that go in. That is some hardcore... That's some hardcore stuff right there. Like,
It is definitely a thing that we enjoy over here, is including little moments of what we refer to as the trope of a fridge horror, where things look just like, oh, well, that's weird or different or funny, and until you take a closer look at what the image is showing, or you think about it just a little too long, and then you realize that is pretty horrifying.
you mean like creepy Jackson Howard, like Jackson Howard Mark II, for example? It seems okay, and then the longer you look at the card, the worse it gets. Or Invasion of Privacy is another really good example. You're like, oh, like, it's not good.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Well,
No,
the thing is Jackson was always supposed to be like that. It's just that people
he didn't come off that way.
Yeah, people never really stopped to think about the fact that he's head of children programming, not child's programming, children programming. Like, he's actually creating the next wave of consumers by, way of brand loyalty.
So we've got an Omni Drive,
we have two Omni drives.
Two Omni Drives. This has Kit on it. Yep.
Yep.
It's pretty good.
So you get an Omni drive for each arm.
Yeah. Seems good. Yeah, and I guess I never really thought about that. But now I'm taking a closer look at the art. It's basically the idea that, like, the chip for the breaker is, like, installed right into her physical body instead of it being something that's attached to her rig.
Yeah. Well, Omni Drive, from a thematic perspective, from the lore perspective, is her console.
Right.
Yeah. She actually keeps her programs inside of her. It's
Right.
part of her hardware.
Right. But she can have more than one because she can put more mods onto her physical form.
Correct.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like it a lot. Yeah, I had never really thought about that before. But yeah, so where do we want to go now? That's all the hardware. Do we want to go to rig or do we want to go to events?
Let's go ahead and do events.
Okay. So what do you want to talk about first?
Well, let's talk about Diesel. I hear it gives you flames.
I hear it does. It's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
It's
It ain't
gone.
bad.
Yeah, it certainly ain't bad. It's no inject, but it's pretty good.
Yes. Well, the benefit that it has over inject in this particular thing is that you're not getting rid of cards that you actually might want, and it's not going to cost you any influence. So
Yeah, and also just
nice little accelerator.
Yeah, and it's just a really good card that fits really well into the Shaper suite, just because Shapers are able to run so many one-ofs. So usually any card that you're drawing, one or two ofs, usually any card that you're drawing, you don't usually want to throw away in Shaper.
Yeah.
So what else do we have?
Well, we've got a little bit of money in Dirty Laundry.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Another really good thematic card. Yeah.
Yep.
If you don't look closely, you sometimes think that she is the dirty laundry, but no, she's the one that's receiving the dirty laundry from somebody else, because looks like there's a picture of a murdered person on a pad inside of a briefcase down there.
That is correct. Good eyes.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just interesting because a lot of times people they look at the cards, but they don't look at the cards.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, which I totally understand. People get wrapped up just in the, what does this card do? How much does it cost? Will it work in my pet deck? And the other considerations start to happen after that. But a lot of our art has what do we call, Easter eggs, little details that really tell a story. Just stop and take a look at them long enough, you'll be surprised by some of them.
Okay, and on that note, I want to know, is the hammer in Independent Thinking Kim's hammer?
I would say
you don't have to tell me.
Yeah, I would say that it would be indistinguishable from any other hammer wielded by any other member of, Human First.
But yeah, I remember when that card was spoiled, I was like, did he just straight up like smash somebody's arm off? Is that where we're going with this, or is it just a hammer that he took off of somebody? I mean, like that's the neat thing. You leave it open.
Yeah, yeah. And an interesting thing here is that we all have our pet theories also for some of these things. Like, I'll create a card and I'll write the art brief for it, and then the artist will come up with the image, and then the other people who are part of my team will look at it, and then they will create their own headcanon around it, and they will do the same, where they will, like Dan Clark or Katrina Ostrander will write an art brief, and then when I'll see the art for it, it makes me start thinking, oh, this is tied to this thing in this way. And sometimes, we talk about it with each other. It's like, is this what you had intended? And then other times you're like, no, I don't want to ask because it's more interesting to me to just have it work the way that I want to in my head.
All right, so we got 3 diesels, 3 dirty laundries. What's the next event? 2 or 3?
2
Okay.
dirty laundries. Emergency shutdown.
Really good card.
Fun card.
So, for those of you who might not have maybe haven't seen this card in a while, unless you're somebody who's played Criminal for a long time, hasn't been as popular in the current meta just because there's a lot more low-cost, high-strength ice that it isn't as much of a value on. Emergency shutdown is if you make a run on HQ, you can derez a piece of ice, which is really good in kit, because you're probably going to only make one good run, maybe a turn, so you're going to have some extra clicks maybe to screw with them a little bit.
Yeah. Well, also because you're kit, you want to be able to ensure that those runs that you're making where that first piece of ice is going to be a code gate, you want it to be one that is going to be particularly useful for you.
Right.
So being able to selectively shut down a piece of ice. So you've got something out there, it's a sentry, it's kind of ugly, but it's the first one you're encountering, so you're hitting it, a couple of times, and then they have to stick another piece of ice out there, and now that next piece of ice they raise is going to be code gate, that sentry now is suddenly, much more problematic to get through. So just shut it down. And if the influence was not so tight, I probably would have stuck in a couple of parasites just for that sort of thing.
Right. So we've got the 2 emergency shutdowns. What else do we have as far as events?
We have Employee Strike.
It's a really good card.
It's a really good card.
It's a really good card. And let's be honest, we have 2 of them, right?
Yes.
They probably should strike. Let's be honest here.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
And we've also got 2 levies. Talk to me about 2 levies in this deck.
Well, what I tend to do when I'm running a kit deck is I want to get my best breakers out as fast as possible so I can be as aggressive as I can early on when her ability is going to give you the greatest leverage. So that frequently means spending a number of turns just consuming cards to get to a decoder. And I don't want to have to hem and haw about, well, this is a really good card and I'm going to want it 3 or 4 turns from now. I just want to just ditch everything that is not going to be immediately helpful. So I have Levy AR Lab Access in the deck. The reason I have 2 is because even though I have Devinder and I have Feedback Filter, damage is a real thing.
Right.
And I don't want to ever end up in a situation where the one that I have gets trashed. You also notice that I'm not running any same old things. So if it gets gone, there's no bringing it back.
Right. There's no takesies, backsies if they both get net damaged or meat damaged away.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot of ops economy. We've got employee strikes and other things that we want to potentially bring back later in the game, and ghost runners as well.
Yep.
So it's not like we have a small number of targets for this. And it's not like, hypothetically, we shouldn't be really using that much real money anyway, right?
Yeah. Most of it really should be coming from your stealth cards and from your lockpick and your Omni drive.
Right. And we've got 2 Maker's Eye over RDIs.
Yes.
fine card. It's also got our first mention of smoke.
Yes.
And go ahead.
I went back and forth about RDI versus the Maker's Eye, and for the most part, I went with the Maker's Eye simply because it's a bigger impact earlier on. I don't have to telegraph what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah, and it synergizes really well with Turning Wheel, right? It can really turn that into a super run, right? If you've got a handful of counters, right, and you're like, I guess I'll C6 and hopefully close the game. Like those power turns, really leveraging that one powerful run a turn idea.
Yep, that's it exactly. And of
All
course,
right,
also with the Livy AR, if I burn them off, early and I don't quite get what I want, I can always levy them and hope to be able to get one of them more in the mid game with one of those big runs.
Yeah, that's fair too. The theme that I'm getting, but the ethos of this deck is basically smoke them if you've got them. Like, use stuff as soon as it comes up.
Yeah.
And then just keep tearing and using that aggression of Kit, right? I feel like that's a trap, not what you're doing, but like the trap that a lot of people fall into with Kit is people are like, oh, but once she's set up, she could be beautiful. And it's like, well, actually, that's not really where you're going to get the most leverage. The most leverage that you're going to get is that spider web, that one spider web on R&D is now a code gate. This other ice that's on the outside is now a code gate. That early aggression. She almost feels kind of like a criminal in the idea of like, let's get going and start really starting to pressure.
Yeah, and that's absolutely correct. You want to be able to threaten as quickly as possible. As a matter of fact, when I thought about it, and the reason why I include the Maker's Eyes over the RDIs is that I would actually almost rather have HQ interface, because one of the things that's going to happen really quickly when they get that opportunity is R&D is going to get 2 or 3 pieces of ice put on it, but HQ is probably going to remain with just 1.
Right.
So being able to hit and access multiple cards from those HQ runs while they've been busy blocking your access to R&D is just one more way of being able to help try and close out those games.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah. But she's only got 10 influence, Damon. You got nobody to blame but yourself.
No, I know. Well, no, yes, I do. I have Lucas. I can always
Lucas
blame
to blame. Yeah, I mean, her ability is super powerful. But yeah, we've only got 10, so sacrifices have to be made.
Yeah, we tried it at 15, and 15 was just way too good. Just so.
Oh, it'd be so good.
So too good.
It'd be so good.
I think 12 would have been the better spot for her, but 10 is what we got.
High design hindsight is 2020. It's not easy to make a game.
I don't even know if I'd say 2020, but it's certainly
hindsight is 4020.
There we go.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's tough though, because like at the time, her ability was really powerful. It's arguably maybe a little less powerful now, as I said, that there's more low cost, higher strength ice. So as far as icebreakers are concerned, we got some neat stuff going on. Do we want to start at the top?
Start at the top.
Can you pronounce the name of this card for me so I don't butcher it?
Ankusa.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. So tell me a little bit about why this is in here.
Ankusa is an elephant goad. It is also a symbol of, let's see if I can remember which. I can't remember. It is the elephant god, and I can't believe I've completely forgotten what his name is.
I'm not terribly.
Ganesh.
Well, Ganesh. There you
got it. So, remover of obstacles is one of his appellations. So the idea here is that she will use this particular breaker to get rid of those pesky barriers that have gotten in her way once they are no longer the outermost piece of ice.
Nice. That's
So,
pretty good.
break it once, send it back to HQ, and they put it back down again. It's going to be in the outer piece, which means it's a code gate again and simple to get through.
That's nice. I like it. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely an interesting design because it's almost like a parasite, but it's kind of worse because they have to repay for it again if they want to put it back down, and they have to redo the install cost, which is also kind of nice.
Yep. It can create a really interesting tempo hit for them from a money perspective. Of course, at 6 credits and 0 strength, it's not exactly cheap.
No.
But with kit, you really should only have to use it on a single piece of ice once.
Right.
The rest of the times you're going to be running into it. It is probably going to they're either not going to bother putting it back down because they recognize that, well, if I put it back down, it's just going to be the outermost piece of ice, which means it's a code gate, which means she can get through it super cheap.
Now, it's also worth noting from a mechanical perspective that with the combination of net-ready eyes and OmniDrive, this could be starting at effectively corroder strength, even though it's very expensive to put down.
Correct.
So that's not bad. That's not terrible. So we've got to talk about the big show. We got to start talking about some decoders.
Ah, yeah. Cyber Cipher.
This was made, in my mind, this was made for kit.
It in fact was made for kit.
Yeah. Because it feeds right into that aggression plan. Like, hey, I've got this down on a server, so until you 2-ice it, I'm just going to get in.
Yeah, at a
forever.
Really cheap cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Cyber Ciphers are essentially there for HQ and for R&D.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I've always used them. I've always just been like, all right, we've reached the stage where I now have my R&D Cyber Cipher. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
So we've also got Dagger, one of pretty good card. I love the even though it's very minimalist, I've always really liked the art for Dagger.
Yeah. So I don't know if you're a fan of comic books at all.
One could say that. Right, you can't see my camera. My wall has framed Ethan Von Sciver signed poster. Nice.
So Dagger matches with Cloak, and a lot of people just sort of begin and end their thoughts with Cloak and Dagger, stealth, sure, spies and stuff. But that's not actually at all what I meant for it to be. I mean, that was also sort of a tongue-in-cheek fun side of it. But the image here of Dagger really reveals what the concept was. Way back in the 80s, there was a superhero team for Marvel, which was Cloak and Dagger. And Cloak used the Dark Force, and Dagger used the Light Force. And she would hide within his Dark Force cloak and appear out throwing her light knives. And that is what essentially the art here is showing.
Thank you for confirming that for me. I have a friend of mine that owes me $10.
Hey!
Because I thought about that reference immediately upon seeing the art for this card.
You, sir, are amazing.
Well, it's a misspent youth. Well, misspent might be the wrong word. Overly dedicated youth to a lot of obscure stuff. So we've also got really my favorite stealth card. And all of Netrunner up to this point, and that's Refractor.
Refractor's pretty great.
So we also have, as far as support, we also have what we were just talking about. We've got 3 Cloaks, tremendous card, which I really like. Not too much needs to be said here, but it is made by one of my all-time. Both of these are actually done by my favorite abstract artist for Netrunner, and that's Adam S. Doyle. I love him. Medium's one of my favorite cards, and Bishop. I just wish it was a better card, or a more effective card in the meta. Because the art on Bishop's beautiful.
Yeah, for a long time, Medium was the background for my phone.
Yeah. And we've got the ubiquitous
Self-modifying code.
set up self-modifying code. You want to talk about like MVP of a big box card? I would have to say that the tie is between self-modifying code and clone chip as probably the two most powerful and also thematic cards in a big
Yes.
box. At least
Yes.
in my
Yeah, and I agree. And it's also the reason I kind of regret both of them being what they are. I think that they both have just a little too much general utility. Creates a power level that is just a little too good to have them in the same faction, giving that kind of recursion and instant speed search for all the right tools just when you need them.
I agree, though I mean, again, this is my personal opinion, but I think again though, you think about it in the time period when they came out, they were really powerful when they came out too, but
Mm-hmm.
runners were also a lot poorer then.
Yes.
And there was also less draw engines then. So having these really good draw engines, all these draw cards that we have,
Mm-hmm.
and also having self-modifying code, and also having good money, kind of like elevates their power levels beyond maybe what was originally intended or anticipated.
Yeah. I mean, at the time, it was a good, strong card. 3 influence made perfect sense. But nowadays I would be like, if I were going to create this now, it'd probably cost 2.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then it would still be a really great. That would make it an even better cake card
Yeah.
because then she'd get it for 1. But yeah, I mean, and it's tough because again, we have things going. Like I always give the example of obviously you've heard this 1.5 million times, but AstroScript pilot program. People are like, how did this ever get made? I'm like, well, in the time period, you have to understand how hard playing NBN was out of the core set.
Yeah.
So, and the core set, they needed an agenda like that to be able to close the game. But
Yeah.
then you add in everything that's come out since then, and the power level goes over 9,000. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
Yeah. And it's just sort of what happens when you have a game that develops over a span of time is that new things are given to help boost this thing or this thing, and you get enough of those things over here and over here and over here, and suddenly you get just enough to make this card, which before was good, not world shattering, just become overwhelmingly dominant.
Right.
And yeah, there is no possible way that you can foresee that sort of thing without having multiple years and a couple of hundred people testing things. Like it's just,
Right.
It's untenable to be able to exact that level of control. I should say, and still have an interesting game. Like if
Right.
every single thing in here was formulaic, like MU is this and cost equals that, and all abilities that fall like this do this thing, and then you could create a formula that would hash out exactly how much something should work, and then nothing ever varied from that. But your effects on your cards would just be very stale, very static.
Right. And that's something I've said to people all the time. You are aware that I'm very active in the online community as well. One of the big things is I try to tell people is have there been design choices? Obviously, you know this. You guys listen to what we say. You obviously hear our feedback. Have there been design choices that ended up after being released and being put, like the 700 monkeys in the room that is the deck building community, where people distill down in a couple of days some of the best uses of some of these cards. But it's like, yeah, that happens sometimes. But like, if we didn't have these outliers where sometimes cards that are too powerful or interactions that are unintentional accidentally happen, then you end up with every card doing basically the same thing.
Yeah.
And then when that happens, you just basically have super generic decks and super generic factions, and then the same thing would basically be dominant forever.
Yeah, yeah, and that is a real thing. When especially what makes it incredibly difficult is that you're dealing with multi-faction, asymmetrical game. One of which depends on hidden information, and I mean, like, figuring out chess is a really easy thing to do. You can just write a computer program and that will take care of that. But for even when we look back and we see things that people have done, and we're like, oh my god, we never thought that this was going to be a thing, or we never expected anybody to put these completely disparate parts together into this frame and be able to create a really dominant deck type. There are times when that thing lasts for months and months, or even a year or more. And sometimes the thing is dominant only once or twice,
Right.
and then it gets out there and everybody knows what it does, and then there's like, oh, well, okay, that solves this problem. And
Right.
that thing that everybody was going like, oh my god, this is never going to go away, it's going to be with us until it rotates out, is suddenly not perceived as a problem at all because someone has created a deck that just dismantles it.
Right. Or I'll give a better an example just from the current meta, right? We had for a few months the growing dread over the prison decks that me and Abram made the second what was it called? Bioethics committee was spoiled. And then people were like, oh, this is the end. And then people took it to tournaments, but only really good players were really able to dominate with them. And then basically people all had an unofficial agreement where everybody was just like, we're done. And then they just kind of have largely, you'll still see a couple of them at tournaments.
Yeah.
But people have largely moved on because basically everybody decided that nobody wants to play Netrunner that way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of the problem is that those decks are complicated. There is a lot of chances for mistriggers and misplays, and doing so just causes you to lose, or at least to not be able to win in the time necessary to actually get enough of a winning record to make the cut.
Right.
And so, yeah, sure, you dominated a game that you didn't actually end up winning.
Right.
So, kudos, but you get people like you get Abram, you get Dan, you guys have the mind to go, okay, I need to do these things in this order all the time, and except for this, and then in this situation I need to reverse it. And you're capable of you have ownership of your decks, and that allows you to be versatile, be able to be dynamic. And that's where the people who have taken someone else's deck and read through the brief of it sometimes will tend to falter, is that they don't know the deck intimately. So when they run up against something, a situation that they are unfamiliar with, they don't know how to respond.
Right.
And so those decks start to fall apart for the general player base, while people like you and Abram and Dan can still go out and wreck face with it.
Well, and I think it depends. I've always said I'm not super great. I'm an above average pilot, but for me, it's about engagement of the card pool, right?
Yeah.
I have a pretty good understanding of how a lot of different cards in the card pool interact, just because I deck build a lot, a lot. So for me, I think about before MWL2 with noise, my turns in tournaments were lightning. Because literally I could just watch what my opponent was doing, and then by the exact second that their turn ended, I knew exactly what all 4 of my noise clicks were going to be, because I had played him since the core set.
Yes.
And it was just it was autopilot, assessing a board state from the perspective of being noise.
Yeah. Well, one of the benefits of that is with less savvy players, that sort of thing puts somebody on tilt real quick.
Right.
It's wow, this guy knows exactly what's going on. He knows everything that I'm going to do and how to respond. And, suddenly they start second guessing themselves and trying to figure out how they can surprise you with things. And once they start doing that, they're playing your game.
Right. And that's also, if you look at a lot of the top tier players, you look at a Timmy Wong, or you look at a Dave Hoyland or a Dan, a lot of that, when they're weeding people out of the cuts, let's say, right?
Yeah.
You see that's what happens. Their efficiency of their turns really puts people on tilt, where people get super uncomfortable by how effortlessly, at least in appearance, they seem to be able to keep control of what's going on.
Yeah.
That I would say that's definitely Dan's big thing.
Oh,
like
sure.
you watch him on stream, he looks like he's not even stressing at all. Right? He's just sitting there relaxed while other people are sweating playing him.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah. So this is the deck. We've got a nice 45 card kit deck, highly thematic. I really don't think from a mechanical standpoint, though, I don't think we're terrible.
No, I would say that this is definitely a game night kit-worthy deck.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think the Solset Slums is going to serve you really, really well right now.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know. I love yellow, and I love controlling the message so much. You brought asset spam back.
Yeah. It's a really interesting counterplay. For a really long time, the idea of multiple remote servers was just not a thing. Like, you had RP who did it, and that was kind of it for a really long time. And NEH would sort of mess around with it a little bit, but it was mostly like, I'm gonna do this thing, create a remote server. This card is going to go away in a couple of turns after I've gotten its money's worth, or what have you. But yeah, the museum decks and just the asset spam decks that have been possible lately have been really interesting to see. But those are not going to be able to stick around forever.
Damon, thank you very much for coming on the program. I really appreciate it.
It was really my pleasure, Dan. Thank you.
Now, is there anywhere? I wasn't able to really find anything. Is there anywhere where you do any blog posting about Netrunner or anything of that nature?
No. Pretty much the only things that I have to say for general public consumption come through, forums like this, where I am currently acting as a representative of Fantasy Flight Games. I mean, I occasionally post things on my Facebook, or I post things on my Twitter more than Facebook for Netrunner, but those are just my personal musings as a private citizen and player of the game, rather than specifically, me representing FFG.
And your eye logos on Twitter, right?
That's correct.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on, and keep doing what you're doing. And
thank you. You too.
You guys have got a direct line into my wallet. I think I'm actually gonna turn into a singularity once the L5R LCG comes out. I'll just be gone forever.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. It keeps food on my table.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's really what it's all about. I just really want to help you pay your rent. I'm just a giver.
I appreciate that, sir. Thank you.
People watching at home, thanks for sticking through the longer episode for the thematic deck build. And until we see you again, always be running.
Good night.